So I'm going to try to prove her wrong. I'll read the first page and the last page of the Blue Guitar. Call me Autolycus. Well, no, don't. Although I am like that unfunny clown, a picker-up of unconsidered trifles, which is a fancy way of saying I steal things. Always did as far back as I can remember. I may fairly claim to have been a child prodigy in the fine art of thieving. This is my shameful secret, one of my shameful secrets, of which, however, I'm not as ashamed as I should be. I do not steal for profit. The objects, the artifacts that I purloin, there's a nice word, prim and pursed. The artifacts that I purloin are of scant value for the most part. Oftentimes their owners don't even miss them. This upsets me, puts me in a dither. I won't say I want to be caught, but I do want the loss to be registered. It's important that it should be. Important to me, I mean, and to the weight and legitimacy of the, how shall I say, the exploit, the endeavor, the deed. I ask you, what's the point of stealing something if no one knows it's stolen, save the stealer? I used to paint. That was my other passion, my other proclivity. I used to be a painter. Ha! The word I wrote down at first, instead of painter, was painster. Slip of the pen, slip of the mind. Apt, though. Once I was a painter, now I'm a painster. I should stop before it's too late, but it is too late. Orm, that's my name. A few of you, art lovers, art haters, may remember it from bygone times. Oliver Orm, Oliver Otway Orm, in fact, O-O-O, an absurdity. You could hang me over the door of a pawn shop. Otway, by the way, after an undistinguished street where my parents lived when they were young and first together, and where presumably they initiated me. Orm is a plausible name for a painter, isn't it? A painterly name. It looked well down at the right-hand corner of a canvas, modestly minuscule but unmissable. The O an owlish I, the R rather Art Nouveau-ish and more like the Greek Tau, the M a pair of shoulders shaking in rich mirth, the E like, oh, I don't know what. Oh, yes, I do, like the handle of a chamber pot. So there you have me, Orm, the master painter who paints no more. So I'm going to read the last page. I won't be spoiling anything. Unlike my brother Benjamin Black, I don't write mystery novels. Well, I do, I suppose, but not in the accepted sense. One winter when I was very young, I can't have been more than 5 or 6, I contracted one of those mysterious childhood illnesses, the effects of which are so vague and general that no one has bothered to give them a name. For days, I lay delirious in a darkened room, tossing and moaning in voluptuous distress. On doctor's orders, my brothers had been banished to sleep somewhere else in the house, and I was left in blissful solitude with my fever dreams. The sheets on my bed had to be changed daily, and I remember being fascinated by the smell of my own sweat, a rank, stale, meaty stink, not wholly unpleasant to my nostrils at any rate. My mother must have been distraught. Polio was rampant at the time. And certainly she was in constant attendance, feeding me on chicken broth and malt extract and mopping my burning brow with a wet face cloth. It was my father, however, who brought me each night a particular and exquisite moment of tender respite when, slipping into my room last thing, he would put his hand under my head and lift it a little way in order to turn up deftly and with remarkable dispatch the cool side of my sodden, hot and reeking pillow. I have no doubt he knew I was awake, but it was an unspoken convention between us that I was sound asleep and unaware of the little service he was doing me. I, of course, would not let myself fall asleep until he had been and gone. What a strange thrill, half of happiness and half of happy fright, I would experience when the door opened, spreading a momentary fan of light across the bedroom floor, and the tall, gangling figure crept towards me like the friendly giant in a fairy tale. How odd his hand felt, too, not like the hand of anyone known to me, not like hand at all, in fact, but like something reaching through to me from another world, and my head would seem to weigh nothing. All of me, indeed, would seem weightless, and for a moment I would float free from the bed, from the room, from myself itself, and be as a straw, a leaf, a feather, adrift and at peace on the soft, sustaining darkness. Thank you.
Is that better? Okay, thank you. So I wanted to start as a museum director with Oliver Ollie Orme, who is a painter and a thief. And throughout the book, you reference painters from Manet to Picasso, from Caspar David Friedrich to De Chirico. And I can't help but wonder if you were able to acquire, illicitly or otherwise, your own blip, as Polly calls it, a painting, which picture in the world would you possess?
Oh, I would pick one of Bonnard's late, from the series of Bagnews, paintings of his wife in the bath, which I think are the great masterpieces. The only painter that Picasso really hated was Bonnard, which shows you how good Bonnard was. And I met Cartier-Bresson in his very late in life, and I said, "You knew them all. Which of them was the best?" And without hesitation, he said Bonnard. He's not a household name, but I think that late series of The Wife in the Bath and the late series of self-portraits are among the greatest works of art of the 20th century. So I'll have one of those, please.
Okay. Which brings me a little bit to the enigma of the blue guitar itself, because critics have referenced Wallace Stevens through his poem and back through that to Picasso, but when I picked it up, I immediately thought of the Braque painting. I'm just wondering, was there a reference point for you when you were thinking about Ollie's paintings?
Braque said a wonderful thing about Picasso. Late in life, he was asked what did he think of Picasso, because they had been, they'd invented Cubism together, and they'd been friendly rivals throughout their lives, more or less friendly. And they asked Braque what he thought of Picasso, and he said, Pablo used to be a good painter, now he's just a genius. Okay. And it's a wonderful, it's waspish, and it's cruel, and it shows envy, but also it's true, I think. The artists that I value most are the people who are not the great ones, not the people sort of bestriding the world. In music, for instance, I would take Fauré, and everybody regards Fauré as a salon composer, but I think that, for instance, the nocturnes, the string quintets, the two-string quintets are absolute masterpieces. But again, they're not all that widely known. So I would rather be good than be a genius.
Well, maybe you can be good and a genius. Is that? I won't.
Well, it's an interesting question, though, because I think you lose yourself in, if you look at people who started out being very good writers like Hemingway and so on, they just lost themselves in this conception of themselves as the great man, the great figure, the great genius, the person who could command $75,000 back in the 1930s from Life magazine for some little piece that he would dash off. To be given the illusion that you're a great man is very, very dangerous for you. I always loved Seamus Heaney for that, despite the world's adulation, that when you sat down to have a drink with Seamus or a meal with Seamus, he was the Seamus that one knew 40 years ago. So it's a great gift to be able to absorb adulation. Well, I'd like to try it myself.
Okay.
If you feel like adulating, do.
Well, The writer Kate Kellaway in The Observer very recently described the blue guitar and you as an unsafe pair of hands. Now, she was referring, I think, to the lack of narrative security that we might feel reading the blue guitar. And of course, that, I think, sense of being at sea is balanced by a language that is both deft and deliberate. And she talks about your matchless prose. So I wonder how you feel about public readings where, in a sense, you can hide your hands, but you must, in some part, at least declare the voice of the narrator.
As you can hear when I was reading, I'm not sure of it. I'm uncertain of it. I don't like it. I don't recognize it. You see, I always say this, that for the writer there are two books. There's a book you're writing and there's a book you've written. And the day that you stop writing it and the day you abandon it, you never finish, you just abandon. And you give it to the publisher. Then it ceases to be yours and it becomes everybody else's. The only person in the world who can't read this book is me. Everybody else can, but I can't, because I bring to it all the weight that went into the making of it. All the false starts, all those failures of nerve on 3 o'clock on Tuesday afternoons. I bring all that to it, so I can't read it. And also, I'm one of those writers that I only see the flaws. I only see the failures. And it's, Senator Norris made poor Beckett's wonderful lines of cliche, fail again, fail better. But that's all we can do, is fail. I comfort myself with the fact that all works of art are failures because all artists set out to achieve perfection and we can't have perfection.
The painter Robert Ryman spoke about his work as a desire to paint the paint, and something that Beckett himself also would have kind of approximated is that sense of trying to push away plot and narrative to have an immersion in language. And this seemed to me, the blue guitar, a real attempt to both coax and somehow confound the reader. I have to admit that I was sent to the dictionary more than a few times.
But that's a good place to be sent.
A good place to be sent.
The dictionary is one of the great achievements of humankind.
It is a great place to be sent. But also, I have to say, I resolutely did not go there because I was so enjoying the writing. So there was a wonderful tension between that, wanting to deliver the end of the rhythm that you were creating in the writing and trying to hold on to the word. And you must know this, that you're creating that kind of conundrum for the reader.
Well, I mean, I'm not... I thought for a long time I was a modernist, but I think I'm not. I'm something before that. I regard modernism as having had two beginnings. There was Henry James, and then there were the modernists who came along at the beginning of the 20th century. Henry James means great modernist, and I follow his line. Nobody else did because it was much more attractive to be experimental and avant-gardist. And I'm a derrière-garde writer. The novel, much as I dislike the form, and I do, it's a vulgar, stupid, messy, difficult form, and I hate it, but I also love it because it deals with the mess and confusion of life itself, the stuff, we just get a moment on earth. We try to make the best of it. And the novelist, it seems to me, has to make the best of people making the best of what they got. I don't mean to be, God knows I'm not an optimist, but then I don't believe in the notions of optimism or pessimism, because if you did, you'd have to imagine that the world is malleable and that history can be switched. I love the notion of the Christian on his knees praying and saying, please God, let me win the lottery tomorrow. And God says, oh, John Banville wants to win the lottery tomorrow. I'll change the entire future history, progress of the world in order to let him win the lottery. This is nonsense. We can't do that. We only have what we have, and that, it seems to me, is what art celebrates, is what we have, not what we imagine that we should have, not what we imagine we have had, but what we have actually had. Just life itself, the ordinary thing.
And the ordinary thing is really celebrated throughout
Well,
the
the ordinary,
book.
I should hesitate. Sorry to interrupt. There's no such thing as the ordinary thing. That's the point of art, is to show that the ordinary, just how extraordinary the ordinary is. I always tell the story that years ago I was driving along Pier Street in Dublin on St. Stephen's Day, when there's absolutely nobody around. I was the only motor car on all on Pier Street. There was not a soul in Pier Street, except standing on the corner of Western Road, 3 albino men deep in conversation. And I thought, if I wrote this, they'd say, oh, there's Banville being gothic. But the world is a far stranger place than we realize. It's simply that we get used to it, that we lose sight of how extraordinary it is.
And that recurs in the wonderful ordinariness of the clouds that pop up all the time through the book. And again, it made me wonder how important the Irish weather was to you, because apart from the glorious day that we had today, we tend to have an ever-changing sky.
Well, that's the delight of this country. I mean, I think the Irish climate is absolutely perfect. People complain about it. I don't know why. It's never too hot. It's never too cold. We don't get tsunamis or landslides, or it's absolutely perfect. And the light is exquisite. It's always exquisite. I don't regard this as an Irish day. This makes me feel as if I'm in the south. But I couldn't live without that pearly, silvery light that we have here all the time. The only city I've ever been in that had the same kind of light is Copenhagen. And I would have fallen in love with Copenhagen if it hadn't been for the Danes.
Okay, well,
Don't say I said that, right?
that idea of northern light or affinities that we might have is also touched on in the novel, in terms of how, in a way, the locus produces, in some sense, the artist, and that certain artists have found their light. And I just wonder, for you, with this writing, that the sense of Irishness in the book is both distinct but not detailed.
But it's strange, you see. I remember when I published The Sea and it won the Booker Prize, and I was famous for 3.5 minutes. I was in Hong Kong. A Chinese woman came to me and said, "You wrote my childhood. That was my childhood."
Okay.
And I said, "But you grew up in Hong Kong." She said, "I know, but that was my childhood." If you do it right, if you get it right, and if you do it specifically enough, by some strange, unrough magic, it becomes universal. I don't know how that trick has worked.
Yeah.
But, I listen, I love music, and I listen nowadays to, on Radio 3 I hear, a Bach cantata, and then at the end of it I hear that it's sung by a Japanese choir. I think, how on earth did they manage to do it? But of course they managed to do it because Bach allowed them to do it. He said, here's the way to do it. And even though you're Japanese or Chinese or from the dark side of the moon, here it is. Here's the universality of it.
And in that universality, you still resist the idea, I think you previously said, that you have no messages to deliver.
Oh,
so
God, no.
it is true.
What message could I possibly have? I always remember Mel Brooks did a thing where he and Carl Reiner did a wonderful series called The 2,000-Year-Old Man. Mel Brooks was supposed to be 2,000 years old, and Carl Reiner was asking him, one of the things he said is, what's the secret? What's the secret of longevity of your... He said, peaches. Eat peaches. Eat a peach every day. That would be about the only message I could have. There is no... The notion that the artist knows something that other people don't is nonsense, and it's dangerous nonsense. We're just like everybody else. In fact, we're not even like everybody else because we don't have as much experience as other people have. We sit in a room for years and years and years and years and years. Somehow, somehow we intuit what life is like out there, but we have no experience of it. I had a friend, and she was always in terrible emotional turmoil, and she would phone me and say, you know, my love affair has gone wrong, tell me what to do. And I'd say, why are you asking me? She said, well, you're a novelist. I said, you're asking completely. The last person in the world you should ask for advice about real life is a novelist. Somehow we can write about it, but we don't know anything about it. It's a mystery that I've never solved.
So that there's a difference, but I think it's true that readers feel a kinship with the writing, and they move that kinship along to the person. So I think
well,
you've
that's
spoken.
a great mistake. Yes, I often at readings, especially in places where I'm not known, I see readers coming towards me to have their book signed, and I can see them looking at me and their eyes glazing over as they say, oh God, he's much shorter than I thought he was. He's much older than I thought he was. And what I want to say to them is, you're coming to the wrong person. The person who wrote this book does not exist. John Banville ceases to exist when I stand up from the desk. I don't know who he is. When you go to that level of concentration, I mean, other people, I presume sports people know it as well, that you lose yourself. You're not yourself anymore. You're something else. And certainly by the time I sort of, you know, you start in the morning and you find it very hard to do. First of all, I started in the morning thinking, I don't know how to do this. I really do not know how to do this. How did I ever do it before? I don't know how to do it. And you fiddle around, and by mid-morning you've written a sentence or two, and then by mid-afternoon you're deep in concentration, completely lost to yourself. And you're not yourself anymore. You're somebody else. At least I am. And at the end of the day, when I finish and I stand up, he stays there and I walk away.
And of course, you've conjured another writer in Benjamin Black. I don't know if I should bring his spectre into the room.
He's perfectly comprehensible because he's my day job. I mean,
okay.
you know, I worked for 35 years in journalism, earning a living. I would write at home during the daylight hours, and in the dark I would go in and be a sub-editor in the Irish Press of the Irish Times, books editor in the Irish Times, and I was an entirely different person. But you only have to think for a second to realize that none of us is a unitary being. We're all manifold. We're all multiple. We change with every moment in the day. There is no self. There is no pilot light burning in there that is me. There's only the constructions that I make. There's only the presentations of myself that I make to myself and to the world. And that's a good thing. Think how boring it would be if everybody was him or herself. We'd be a world of robots, morons. It's because we constantly invent ourselves. That's what makes life so interesting and so multifarious.
In the Blue Guitar, there is an unraveling at times, though, of the kind of certainty that we might expect previously with your voice. I just wonder, is that something that you kind of very deliberately decided that you wanted to leave gaps, spaces, lack of full stops?
There's nothing in there that hasn't been intended.
Yeah.
Well, I shouldn't say nothing, but certainly, you know, I control the thing from start to finish insofar as I can. But a lot of it is controlled dreaming. One has to trust one's instinct. One has to let something happen if it seems to be the right thing to do. There are a couple of dreams in there that were dreams that I had. I just got up in the morning and put them in the book, trusting that my instinct would justify the presence of the dream in the book. But then it's all dreaming. I mean, it's a very strange business. You know, at least twice a week I look up from I stop writing, I lift my fountain pen, and I think, what am I doing here? This is no way for a so-called grown-up human being to live. Sitting here writing out these stories, these transcendent lies. But the strange thing is that I sit there amusing myself and telling myself these stories and writing this thing and trying to get it as near to perfection for myself, get as near to perfection as I can for myself. And by some strange magic, that becomes an object that appeals to, and no, it doesn't appeal, that speaks to other people as well, and speaks for other people. It's a very strange business. Why people should be interested in reading my dreams, I don't know. But then I've said it 1,000 times in public, but I'll say it again, that the best analogy for writing fiction is that if you have one of those immensely significant dreams that you have only 2 or 3 times in your life, they seem to contain everything you are, they seem to account for everything you are, but you can't understand it. You get up in the morning, you start to tell the person on the other side of the breakfast table about your dream, and the person on the other side of the breakfast table yawns, because there's nothing more boring than other people's dreams. And if you said, all right, I'm going to spend the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years writing that dream, and I'll give it to you to read, and when you read it, you will have the dream. That seems to me what writing fiction is.
Wow. I think that at one point in The Blue Guitar, Ollie says that pictures are intended as autonomous things that you put into the world, and yet you've just kind of demonstrated the connection back to yourself. So they are both that.
Oh, but that's what I'm doing it.
Yeah.
When I've done it, it has no more connection with me. It's gone.
Okay.
I can't remember. Somebody once showed me a leaving certificate examination paper with a piece of anonymous prose on it and said, what do you think of that? I said, it looks vaguely familiar. And I said, yeah, it is, because you wrote it. I don't remember. You see, you have to clear stuff away in order to move on. You know, one's masterpiece is always the next book.
Yeah.
The ones that have gone before are all just, so much dross. And if I were to meet a writer who liked his or her own work, I would be very, very suspicious.
I'd just like to ask you a little bit about, before I hand over to the audience, just about children in the book, because it seems to me there's an interesting analogy between works of art and children, as in, like you say, you kind of produce them, they're their own thing in the world, and then they're away. But children are given quite short shrift in The Blue Guitar. They kind of rarely appear, and yet when they do, they almost seem the only equal to Oliver in the looking that they give back to him.
Yeah.
So I guess the good question that I think is, in a way, our society tends to glorify or infantilize children. This was quite a refreshing way to see them as almost assided, but given a respect of determinedness that they undoubtedly have.
I make myself very unpopular now by saying that I regard children as handicapped adults.
Okay.
They have their own world, but it's not a world that I understand or am particularly interested in. I just keep waiting for them to grow up so that I can have conversations with them about real things. This is a grave, well, it's not a fault because I can't help it, but it's a grave lack on my part. But I find children uncanny. I found myself uncanny when I was a child. I found the way in which I disliked the world and disliked myself and disliked my place in it and disliked the people around me. I couldn't wait to be grown up. Still waiting. The only person I've ever met who felt the same was Susan Sontag. She just said, childhood is nonsense. Just get it over with. You know, it's too long. It's because we've evolved in this strange way that we have this immensely long childhood. Childhood should last about 18 months, and then you should be grown up. And I think most children feel that themselves. You know, they all want to. I was listening to Janice Galloway on the radio yesterday saying that when she'd come out of class, she would roll the waistband of her skirt to get it above her knee, and, light up a cigarette because she wanted to be grown up. Everybody wants life to start. Childhood. And also, in another way, there's no such thing as children. They're just pretending to be children in order to save our embarrassment. They have to pretend that they don't know all these things that they know perfectly well.
Well, that certainly comes across in the novel. And also, I would say that Ollie's kind of painful self-criticism is something that has to accompany you throughout. And would you accept that there is then, as the reader, a kind of a gentleness for Ollie that he doesn't have for himself? That, you know, you do create in the reader moments of understanding that he never attains.
Oh yes, of course.
In his own character.
Yeah, I remember a friend of mine when I published the Book of Evidence, and Freddie Montgomery in the Book of Evidence is a murderer and a all-round bad lot. But I remember a friend of mine saying, you know, oh, I really hated him, but God, I had to sympathize with him as well.
Yeah.
Any character that tries to be honest is going to win the reader's sympathy.
Yeah. That's right.
Not affection, but sympathy.
Well, that might seem like a good point to include, I'm sure, our very honest audience. I'd like to throw it out for any questions that you might have. You might let me know by putting up your hand if you do have one. And if not, myself and John can keep talking.
It's a terrible moment,
isn't it? It's very awful. You can to start that ball rolling.
I'm going to see the moment to have a strep.
I have one. Okay, you have your strepsil, and we'll have this lovely lady.
I'm Sam Mali, and I live locally. But you just said that no author likes his work. Why then do authors delegate books to people? Is it insult?
That's a very good question. I never thought of that one before. Did you hear the question? The question was, if authors dislike their own work, why do they dedicate books to their friends and relatives and so on? Is it kind of revenge? And maybe it is. I don't know. No, it goes back to what I said, that when I finish a book, it's no longer mine. It's an object that I can offer to someone and say, you know, here, take this dedication. But I remember a good friend of mine, a poet, dedicating a book to me. And I made the terrible faux pas of saying, don't you think it's a bit vulgar? And the way I do, you know, I think maybe one should dedicate books to one's family and one's loved ones, but dedicating to friends always seems to be saying, you know, I'm presenting the bill.
Do we have... I've got a question here, and I think we've got microphones coming here, just in the third row. Thank you.
Hello. Is that... Yeah, hello. Actually, kind of following on from that question, the question I was going to ask was, you were saying about not liking your work or not maybe appreciating it, but there must have been a point when you started out that you thought it was good enough, because you must have, at some point in your early career, have submitted your work. So I don't really understand why you're saying authors shouldn't, or you would be suspicious of an author who thought their work was good.
No, I understand the question, and I'm as puzzled by it as you are. Really, I am. Why do I keep on with this bloody thing? At this stage of my life, I don't know what else to do. But, as I say, it's always the next one, you see. You think, oh, that's wrong. When I finish a book, and I send it to my publisher, first of all, I expect that my publisher will say, so I'll put this away in a drawer. I was convinced The Sea would not be published. Maybe it shouldn't have been. But you always think, you see, there's nothing more delightful than being in the early stages of a book, because everything is possible. I can do anything here. I can make a masterpiece that will live through the ages, that will outlive Shakespeare, you know. You know rationally that that's not going to happen. and it's just going to be another bloody book. But somehow, you know, the part of your brain that wants you to do this thing suppresses the part of your brain that says, don't be such a bloody fool. Why do this again? So, also undertaking a novel is a strange process. I remember Seamus Heaney saying to me how much he admired novelists because, as he said, you know, 3 bad poems in a volume of 30 poems is not going to ruin the book, but 3 bad chapters in a novel and it's destroyed. So it is a huge, huge undertaking. It's a bit like building a dam. You know, you can't have any leaks, or the whole thing will drown the valley. But we keep pressing on, thinking that we'll achieve perfection. And along the way, one does get every now and then a sense of, you know, this sentence or that image or that paragraph. You think maybe that's not too bad. I had a very strange experience when I was doing, I can't remember, the Infinities, I think it was. I decided that I needed to quote something from a previous book of mine on the last page. I don't know why, just felt right. So I took the book down from the shelf and copied it out. You know. And because I was copying it, I wasn't reading it. So I achieved a distance from it. I thought, God, that's really quite a good sentence. And it's because I was so far away from it, I was distanced from it, that I could see what was in it. I always tell this thing about that great genius, Gary Larson, that great cartoonist. He has a marvelous cartoon which is in 2 panels. The top panel is a bed of flowers, and they're all absolutely beautiful, you know. And it says how people see flowers. And then the bottom panel is they've all got crossed eyes and bad snagged teeth and cauliflower ears. It's how flowers see themselves. And that's my attitude to my books, you know. I hope people see beauty in them. Certainly hope people see the effort, the striving towards perfection, but I can't see it. And God forbid that I should, you know.
There's a hint of that, isn't there, in the Blue Guitar, because there's mirrors and Oliver's looking at himself in mirrors or mirrored glass. And then there's also the idea of the various Olivers that seem to pop up, whether they're Olivia's or other Olivers as well.
Well, he has a lot of fun with names.
He really does. But that's a deliberate look
Yeah,
to us
playful.
as a reader to start to search.
No, it's just me playing. The older I get, the more playful I become. And I hope I was never solemn. Well, I suppose I was when I was young. I'm always serious, but I hope never solemn. Solemnity is the death of art. Because when you're solemn, you start taking yourself ridiculously seriously. Now, immediately I think of Yeats, who had absolutely no sense of humor whatever, saw himself as a great figure, made himself into the Irish poet, and succeeded against all the odds. He should have fallen flat on his face and been just another windbag. But out of this windbaggery, he made extraordinary poetry, which is one of the reasons that he's, for me, an emblematic figure. People always talk about the influence of Beckett or Nabokov or whatever. Nobody ever seems to see the influence of Yeats. Yeats has been a great influence on me from the very start. As I say, it shouldn't work, but Yeats' poetry shouldn't work, but it does. Once he got rid of all that Celtic Twilight nonsense and, you know, realised that Maud Gonne wasn't Helen of Troy and so on, when he grew up, he made the most extraordinary poetry. But again, it was done through language. He made a language for himself. Yeats's English is unique to Yeats. Anyway, that's very far away from the question. Sorry.
We have another.
I read The Infinities and I enjoyed it very much. I have a comment rather than a question. I think that John Banville is a master of atmosphere and mood, and he's able to create moods and emotions and relate those flawlessly. And he referred very much, I think almost every second page, to the light, and how the light affected the mood and the atmosphere of the book. Perhaps we could have a comment.
Well, even though, I mean, there is a question there that I am not a postmodernist. There are no postmodernists left. You've given up that fashionable notion. But if I'm post anything, I'm post-humanist. I don't see human beings as the center of the universe. For me, human beings are figures in a landscape. We are we're manipulated by our surroundings. We think we're autonomous beings, but we're as susceptible to light as we are to a political speech. We just don't realize it. This is one of the things that makes life so delightful and so difficult, is that we're being pulled in all kinds of directions at all times. But we are not what we think we are. We are not masters of the universe. And the great, this is where I leap onto the saddle of one of my hobby horses, one of my many hobby horses. I think that the break with the animal world, which occurred, I think, in the Victorian era, just as Darwin was telling us exactly the opposite. But that was disastrous for us, and we lost contact with the animals, with the animal world. When we got this notion that somehow, at some point in evolution, we had taken a step upward and we'd cease to be animals and become some kind of demigods. This is a great disaster for us. We should keep in mind that we are animals, and we should glory in the fact that we're animals, and stop this ridiculous notion that we own the world. I mean, partly in this country it's to do with the bloody catechism, you know, which says, why did God make the world? God made the world for man's use and benefit. He didn't. Well, as Beckett says, he doesn't exist, the bastard. But, you know, if he did, he didn't make it for our use and benefit. He made it for his own amusement, if he made it for anything, so he could torment us. But again, seriously, I think that the break that we made with the animal world was totally disastrous for us. It's too big a topic to bring up now.
Well, we've got a question here in the second row. Oh.
Yes, hello. I wanted to ask you a question about the words you use. You mentioned it earlier. I find I don't want to lose the rhythm of the read by stopping to look up a word the whole time, so I write them down. But do you collect words? Do you have a collection of words that you want to use, or do they come to you as you're writing?
No. I mean, you couldn't collect words. That would be false. It would be fake. Words snag in my mind the way our fingernails used to snag in girls' nylons when we were young. Back in the good old days. And I summon them up when I need them, but I don't. You know, I had a friend, he said, oh, I see, in this review you've been accused of using big words again. They're difficult, and big words like marmalade and screwdriver and so. I don't use, I think, it is the duty of the literary artist to keep a language alive, to keep a language rich. I always say tyrants love simple language, and even more tyrants love inaccurate language, because then they can lie with impunity, because people are lying to themselves by misusing language. So it's one of my duties as a citizen, as well as an artist, is to keep these words in, to keep them from dying. I heard there's a guy called, I can never pronounce his name, Muncon Munchon or something, an RT.
The Irish one.
And I heard him doing a wonderful interview, and he said that there are all these words in the Irish language that are very specific. He said there are thousands of them, and they're dying. So he started this project where He gives you a word. He gives me a word. You know, you're going to protect this word. You're going to keep this word. I thought it was absolutely, it's an amazingly wonderful idea. Pure genius. Everybody should be given a word. You know, here's your word. You protect this word. You use it as often as you can. You keep it in play. I mean, language is such an extraordinary thing, especially the English language, precisely because it's so impure. And yet, it's impure and it's precise as well. There is a word for everything. Do you know that when you get up in the morning and you stretch and you yawn, you know there's a word for that? Now, it's not the most beautiful word in the dictionary. It's pandiculation, but there is a word for that. Somebody invented a word for stretching and yawning. Isn't that marvelous? You know, because this is what makes us human, the fact of language. And the fact that we can string words together into sentences to make ideas, to make images, to make declarations. This is what we are. And I always get annoyed when people say, oh, I had to go to the dictionary. What do you mean you had to go to the dictionary? You know, this is the thing, I had to go to the lavatory. A dictionary is a marvellous thing, absolutely marvellous thing. And when you look up a word in the dictionary, you always find 2 or 3 other words. You say, oh, I didn't know that meant that. Or, oh, look at that strange word. And you think, oh, my God, I never knew there was a word for that. Yeah. It's an absolutely wonderful thing. It's delightful. It's play. I understand that you don't want to interrupt your reading. But think of it as when we were children, we were learning to read. We skipped the hard words. Just skip the hard words. And they'll stay in your mind and you'll come across them again and you'll find them again. Language is this wonderful, it's like being in a sand pit, you know, and the words are as numerous as the grains of sand in a sand pit. God, there's a dreadful image. Sorry, I must be getting tired.
Okay. We go to the question in the second row, but just to say there's something then in a difference between collecting, which a lot of your characters tend to want to do. They want to collect to possess. And that idea of caring, which is at the root of Mancon's project, which is kind of the curare, to care for something, to grow it.
Yeah, I think...
But you create a lot of characters who want to truly possess things.
Yes, that's an interesting distinction. Possession is different to caring. My characters tend not to care very much. But boy, do they want to possess. I mean, they're all monsters.
Okay.
I think of all my monsters, probably he's the worst of all. But, you know, we are monsters at a certain level. I certainly am.
I've got a question in the second row, and then I'll come back.
Yeah, you mentioned the dreams in the Blue Guitar. Is there anything autobiographical about your work? And if there is, are you conscious of it when you're actually writing it?
Well, that's the strange thing about fiction, that it's all fiction is autobiographical and it's also completely not autobiographical. It's strange. John McGahern used to say, it's all made up. And it is, because fiction, even the real stuff you take from life becomes fictionalized by being put into a fiction. It's a strange business that I don't understand. I'm not being evasive. I don't understand it. I don't want to understand it. When I was young, I thought that I was in control of everything I was doing. The older I get, the more I realize that it's like a process of controlled dreaming, and that I have to trust my instincts, or his instincts, the guy who sits at the table and writes. I'm writing a book at the moment, which is a sort of Henry Jamesian thing, but I'm finding words and cadences and rhythms that I didn't know that I knew constantly. Sometimes I will use a word, and I have to look it up in the dictionary because I don't know the meaning of it. I find it's the right word. Things stay in our minds. Our brains are amazingly capacious. We use a tiny part of it. You know, who knows how many words there are way off there that you think you've forgotten but that you haven't. I mean, we could talk for the rest of the night about memory and forgetting. Freud said, and it's one of the most profound things he ever said, is that the strange thing is not that we remember, but that we forget. Why do we remember completely trivial things and forget absolutely momentous things. Until we get to the bottom of that, we won't understand anything about the brain and how it works. That's another.
I think they say a little further back.
You talked about the difficulty about being objective, viewing your own work objectively. I just wonder, how do you feel then about criticism?
Well, that's very easily answered because I don't read any of it.
Okay.
I don't read any reviews, I don't read any interviews, I don't read anything about myself.
Even from people you know, close by, what if they criticise it? How do you feel about that?
No.
They never say
Well, I don't
anything.
know because I don't look at the
They
paper,
don't tell
so
you.
I don't know.
Okay.
No, I always say you can always trust your best friend to tell you about the really bad reviews.
Okay.
They'll phone you up and say, did you see that thing in the Irish Times? I'd sue if I were you. And I say, no, I don't want to know about it. I don't want to hear about it. And they say, oh, let me read you this passage. I say, no, please don't. Please don't. But they do. It's the old Confucian thing. They love to see their best friend writer falling off a high roof.
We've got a guy.
It's a wonderful freedom when you don't read stuff about yourself. You become transparent. You imagine you're transparent.
Great. We're going down here.
Thank you. Yes. I just wanted to ask if you have your books in audio format for those of us who may not have very good sight.
Oh, yes, they're all.
Are they all?
Oh, yes, all of them.
Oh, that's wonderful news. Thank
Go
you very
on
much.
to Google or whatever it is. They're all on.
Thank you.
I'm fascinated by the notion of there being at least two John Banvilles. The one who, in the middle of the afternoon, reaches a kind of a peak creatively, and the one who's with us tonight. Can you tell us something about the difference between the two?
Well, the difference between the two is that I don't, as I said, I don't know who the other one is. I'm always wary of talking like this because it sounds mystical or magical or religious or something. It's not that. It's to do with concentration. And everybody knows about concentration. If you concentrate on a golf swing or making a piece of furniture or playing a piece of music, concentration, we lose ourselves. We cease to be ourselves and become the thing itself. We become the thing we're concentrated on. It's a very strange process. As I say, I don't understand it. I don't want to understand it. But, the point is that I'm of no consequence whatsoever. None. Apart from the fact that I look after my children as best I can, encourage them to grow up quickly. I vote, I pay my taxes, all that stuff. But I'm of no consequence whatsoever. This is the difficulty of sitting here, because I'm speaking on behalf of somebody on whose behalf I'm not permitted to speak, really. So it's all made up.
Okay.
No, that's not true. I don't want to be... It's a very complicated relationship between the self and the creative self. Very strange and intricate and puzzling and fascinating.
I think we have a question.
There's a lady here who
Yeah,
wants to-
okay. We've one here, and then I'll come to you. Thank you.
Hi, I'd like to ask John, do you read fiction yourself for pleasure? And the end of the sentence is, who do you like?
Did you hear the question, do I read fiction? I read very little fiction now, which is a great source of regret to me. I don't know why. I read poetry, I read philosophy, I read history, I read memoirs, I read them with great pleasure, but I read very little fiction. I reread fiction, but somehow I've got to an age where I don't need what fiction gave me when I was younger. And I say that, as I say, with deep regret. I miss it. And every now and then when I do read a novel, I think, good Lord, novels are really quite good. I should read more of them. I would say slightly in my defense, I think that fiction is somewhat in the doldrums at the moment. But then how can I say that since I don't read it? But I don't feel that crackle of electricity in the air that there used to be when I was young. Where you would wait for a new McGahern or a new Aris Murdoch or a new John Updike or a new whatever.
I have to say, I think you should read Lisa McInerney's Glorious Heresies there, because she's a really cracking young writer who's talking about Cork. The Glorious Heresies. She just won the Orange Prize. I've got to put it in my...
I'm sure there are thousands of books I should read, but I'm old and broken down.
Okay, well then, don't critique the generation you haven't read.
No. That's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that I can't feel the crackle in the air. Yeah. But that, I think, has to do with my weariness and my, that I've read so much through the years. Yeah. That's for a new generation to come along and kill me now, which is what...
But we don't quite want to off you just yet, so I think
I remember talking to John Boyne and Claire Kilroy and so on one day, and I said, you people are all nice to each other. What is this about? Why aren't you stabbing each other in the back the way we did in my generation? Okay. Things have changed. They do support each other.
Yeah,
I find this incomprehensible. To me, I remember Michael Longley saying to me, they say Northern poets are a backslapping society. I don't think slapping is quite the word.
We have a question, I think, down at the back row. Can we go down the microphone? Thank you.
Thank you. My question relates to inspiration, and in the book, The Blue Guitar, the artist seems to lose his inspiration and his muse, as someone I think has referenced, and the loss of it and his inability to create anymore. And I wondered where your inspiration came from. You're a prolific writer, you've written a lot of books. Is it a nugget or is it a great idea when you come to a new story?
Well, the only answer I can give to that is to say that each sentence generates the next one. That's how I work. I have no grand scheme. If I get a sentence as near to right as I can get it, then the next one will make itself. In fact, even as I'm writing a sentence, the next one is already making itself in some other compartment in my mind, and that's how I work. If that's inspiration, then that's what it is. But again, it's a mysterious business, and thank goodness that it is.
Some of the writers that I think are quite present in your work, when I read The Blue Guitar, I kept thinking back to Baudelaire and Les Fleurs du Mal, and how he would write about Delacroix and, had this engagement again with the visual arts. And of course, this is my default position as a curator, so you have to forgive me that as well. But also Beckett wrote art criticism. Have you ever thought, I know you write reviews for the Irish Times, would you ever consider writing about art?
No, I wouldn't have the... I've written about art now and then, but I wouldn't have the confidence or the knowledge or even the sympathy to write directly about art. I would feel inadequate. I mean, to me, the other arts seem magical. I mean, music. To me, Patricia is here. She plays the violin. She plays the viol consort, and I say to her again and again, this seems to me a kind of alchemy, that these marks on this page can turn into this ecstatically beautiful sound. It's incomprehensible. So I would be wary. I would be too modest, I think, to imagine that I could write about about the other art forms with any authority.
Well, perhaps that is a good place to bring this evening to a close, not just on his modesty, but in the extraordinary feeling that we have about John Banville's work, because I think we all feel the same, and that extraordinary writing that you've given us yet again here in the Blue Guitar. I just have to say, my father gave me the Book of Evidence when I was, I think, 19 years old, and I have been reading your fiction ever since. It was one of the things that made me crave art. So you've sent, I know, me on that journey and many others here, and it's a thrill to have the light go down behind us. The day is finally becoming Irish again, perhaps
we were sitting
in respect to
place.
a wonderful writer of the light, John Banville.
Thank you.